Hello, everyone. We're going to give people a few minutes to start and just kind of get settled in. So if you guys want to get comfortable, this is for CLE, and we will give the code at the end. So if you could just be patient with us for a few minutes, and then we will get started and kick this off. For those of you who are just joining, we're going to give it about 1 more minute and then we'll kick it off. There is CLE credit for those of you who are attorneys looking for that, and we will share that with you all at the end of the presentation. So give us about just under another minute and we'll kick this off. Okay, we're going to get started now. I know we've got more people who are probably going to be joining us, but welcome, and we're very glad to have you. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're watching from. And I'm excited for this presentation. I am joined by 2 great speakers, and we will be hopefully enlightening you on some of the things that have been happening in the news and have been very heavy and on people's minds about immigration, what's been going on, especially with some of the international students who've been targeted by our government lately. Just as a way of introduction, my name is Kate Brady. I am the Immigration Department Head here at the Muslim Legal Fund of America. I've practiced immigration and nationality law exclusively since about 2006 and have done a lot of family-based and employment-based petitions before U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. I've worked with clients before the Department of State, representing a wide variety of people from different parts of the world, different companies, and had some experience also in the Immigration Court, which is the Executive Office of Immigration Review, and done also some appeals of those cases through other agencies. And I really enjoy that as far as being able to assist clients. And I'm also joined today by my senior staff attorney here at the Muslim Legal Fund of America, Franchelle Daniel. She began her legal career in civil litigation, focusing on product liability, and she's been here at MLFA for about 4.5 years. And she's represented clients in both state and federal court prior to coming to MLFA, and she's got a great academic career studying abroad in London, and also done some good charity work through revocations and promoted and protected a lot of human rights in her career. And she's promoted a lot of equality and combated discrimination against many populations, and especially there at revocations against the Gypsy, Roma, and traveler population. She was a founding member of the Charlotte Advocates Against Trafficking Humans in Charlotte, North Carolina, while she was attending school, and she earned her bachelor's degree in psychology from Lipscomb University and graduated magna cum laude from Charlotte School of Law and served as the article editor there on the Law Review, also as a member of the Moot Court. She has an additional master's in counseling psychology from Tennessee State University and a master's of science in public service management from Cumberland, and she's licensed to practice in Texas, Washington, and most recently Michigan. We're also joined by one of our MLFA alum, Waleed Nasser. He's the founder and principal attorney of Nasser Immigration Law, and he focuses on federal immigration litigation, asylum, and family-based immigration. He has filed dozens of lawsuits in multiple jurisdictions across the United States against the United States government. He's worked on mass plaintiff cases involving hundreds of systematic delays in the immigration system and against the unlawful policies of our government. He's also helped numerous families and asylum seekers obtain legal status in the United States, and is actively involved in Palestinian American related advocacy. And he is admitted to practice in 13 district courts, probably growing by the day, because I know he's all over the US. And he's a member of the American Immigration Lawyer Association's Federal Court Litigation Section, and the Immigration Benefit Litigation Committee. So he's also very active at the national level there for immigration lawyers. So I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of an overview before I kick it off for our two speakers who are going to give more of a deep dive. The titles of our slides that we've taken, in addition to the unprecedented, because the things that are happening in today's immigration world are really unheard of and things that we would have never expected. The quotes are coming from our illustrious Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. And this one, creating a ruckus, I took because I felt like it tells both sides of the story. The government has been doing some things that have really made the system more difficult, but also immigration practitioners and civil rights lawyers have just as forcefully fought back. So just to kind of set the stage, though, about what we're going to be talking about, there's a lot of agencies that are involved in immigration, and I'm sure many of you have heard these in the news or when you've read articles, but even DHS, there's a lot of different agencies there. There's ICE, and there's U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, there's Custom and Border Protection, there's a lot of sub-agencies too, things that don't really pertain to this particular discussion. But in addition to that, we also get thrown in with the Department of State, we have the Department of Justice, and all of those play a different part, and they have different ways that they are working in the system and kind of trying to be the gatekeepers of our immigration system. But in addition to that, there are constitutional protections that go throughout this process for immigration enforcement. When you talk about immigration, there are benefits you can get, citizenship, permanent residence, but there's also enforcement, and that's really what's been on the forefront right now in the news. People that are in situations where the government wants to kick them out, or they, are flying them to third countries. That's in our lingo, we call that enforcement. But the same Constitution still protects every person in the United States. And that means that those people have the same due process rights. I'm sure you've heard that buzzing around, that the government is not protecting people's due process rights. They're not following the rule of law. And so that's really the frustrating part when we're trying to work within a system that's already biased against the non-citizens, that they're now in this administration trying to even take away the constitutional protections. Unfortunately, in immigration court, you do not have that Sixth Amendment right to have an appointed counsel, but you do have the right to hire counsel. So what we're seeing, of course, is that the executive branch is trying to take away due process and invoke these archaic laws, but really we're seeing it as more punishing that First Amendment free speech and ignoring normal procedures. And so that's why those civil rights and immigration attorneys are pivoting and going into federal court, when normally the system that we've all learned is you kind of go through the administrative process, because most of what happens on the back end is administrative before you get into federal court. But there's some really high profile and great things that are happening where the immigration bar has banded together, really, and it's awesome to watch. And Waleed is part of these national committees at the American Immigration Lawyer Association, where there's a lot of cooperation, and they're going in on these cases where Frankie's going to talk about some of these people who really disappeared right off of the street, and instead of just playing in the field of the immigration court, they're going right to federal court, and they're demanding a right that's out of the Constitution for habeas, not to be unlawfully arrested and disappeared off the street and taken into these immigration jails. And also, in what Waleed's going to talk about, you're going to hear about some temporary restraining orders and some preliminary injunctions, because that's basically how you stop them in their tracks. So I'm excited for you to hear a lot more about these. And we're going to start off talking here about Frankie's section and some of the interesting cases that are going on. And I'm going to give it over to her, and then I'll come back on, and Waleed will give us a little bit at the end there. He'll have his section, and so we hope you enjoy what we have to share with you today, and that you maybe get some context for what's been happening.
Can you all hear me? I think mine froze. It did not proceed to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so as Kate mentioned, I'm Franchelle Daniel. I go by Frankie. I'm the senior immigration staff attorney here at MLFA. And so, what we're talking about today, as you can see, the title of the slide says, oh, it's okay. So the title of the slide says "Otherwise Lawful," and that, as Kate mentioned, sort of comes from a quote that Secretary of State Rubio gave in. A memo that was put forward to immigration court in Mahmoud Halil's case, which is his picture is there on the screen right now. And so why did we pick that? Because essentially in that quote, he acknowledges that a lot of the behaviors that they are complaining about are otherwise lawful. It's like they are trying to circumvent the law. And really what that quote says, I'm going to read it to you. It's kind of lengthy, but it won't take me that long. But it basically says under the INA section 237, for cases in which the basis for this determination of the alien's past, current, or expected beliefs, statements, or associations that are otherwise lawful, the Secretary of State must personally determine that the alien's presence or activities would compromise a compelling U.S. foreign policy interest. And so I'm going to talk about some of the ways and some of the tools that the government is using either to circumvent the law or some of the specific rights and constitutional rights that they are actually violating with the things that they're doing. And so I'll start off by talking about these anti Semitism executive orders. So during the last Trump administration, he issued Executive Order 13899, which basically was to combat anti-Semitism. And in that executive order, he called on the heads of government agencies to basically bring him opportunities, bring him methods in which he can um, sort of deport and combat. He uses combat anti-Semitism, but really um, get at people that are voicing political opinions that are contrary to his own. And so that was issued during the first Trump administration. Obviously, we've had interim president. And so during that time, or intervening president, I should say, during that time, and that executive order was nullified. So as soon as Trump came into this new administration, very shortly thereafter, he issued Executive Order 14188, which basically reinstates all of the stuff from the previous one and then offered additional measures. And it was again asking within 60 days. He wanted the heads of these government agencies to bring him methods, mechanisms, bring me the tools that I can use to deport or detain to get rid of immigrants that I don't want here, is essentially what it's saying. Obviously, that is not how it's worded, but that is the premise of the executive, or that is the way that it has been utilized. And so this presentation, we're really talking about international students, but I want to talk for a moment about how they're using this Alien Enemies Act, in which they haven't thus far used it in the student cases. But again, they're laying the groundwork. It's very much the same format that they've done with these executive orders. And he has this plan and he is trying to figure out, which we've seen previous administration as well. We see how they will throw something out there, let's see how it sticks, and then they refine, they'll back it up. They started, like last time they started with Muslim bans, they were challenged in court. They had to keep backing it up, and eventually they got one that passed constitutional muster, and that's what stuck. So I think here with the use of the Alien Enemies Act, what he's doing again is we're going to just see what we can do. They have disappeared, as the term is now, multiple people off the streets, right? And they're getting pushed back in the courts, and so they're again regrouping, refining, how far can we go? And with the use of the Alien Enemies Act, what they've done, I'm sure you've heard of the Kilmar Abrega Garcia case, which not a student, but in that case, Salvadorian native had the right to, he was in the U.S. legally and had withholding of removal, which is a specific um, relief that was granted in immigration court to him. He was not supposed to be removed to El Salvador, but he was. The government has acknowledged that that was in error, but they're not making the effort to bring him back, right? But what they're doing with that law, this law from the late 1700s, that has typically been used in wartime, they are trying to lay the groundwork to say, hey, these Venezuelan gangs, these gangs are invading, and we need to treat it as if it's wartime and get them out of here. So that's the groundwork they're laying there. We tend to think they're again going to try the same thing with protesters and these pro-Palestinian speakers and protesters. I think they're laying the groundwork to say, hey, we're being invaded by these, as they would say, Hamas lovers, which we know is not accurate, but that's what the government is trying to argue. And we're being invaded. We need to be able to utilize this law. So while it hasn't specifically been used yet in the student cases, we think that that is sort of the groundwork that they're laying. And so I just kind of want to put that out there. But let's look at the laws, the constitutional rights that are already being impacted, that they are already just treading and stomping on. Obviously, the First Amendment right to free speech, right? Really, what has brought a lot of these students to their attention has been their either activism or protest or op-ed pieces that they have written at their school that is advocating for fair treatment for Palestinians, right? It's not that they're advocating or supporting or in any way spreading Hamas propaganda, which is what the government is saying, but they are voicing their discontent with what's happening in Palestine. And that is political, and it is in opposition to the government's stance. And so they are trying to find ways to get rid of them, which is completely contrary to the First Amendment right to free speech. And so that's one of the rights that is being impacted. And I'm going to talk about some cases where you can see each time that comes up. So also, Fourth Amendment right against unlawful search and seizure. Again, if they are going to detain you, take you, they should be affording you one. They should have a warrant. They are not doing that. And if you're looking at a warrant, we're talking about a judicial warrant. We're not talking about an immigration warrant. We're talking about a warrant signed by a federal judge saying that you have the right to be here to search or take this person at this address or wherever it is. You will see when I talk about some of these cases, they are not only not presenting that type of warrant, they're not presenting a warrant at all. And so complete violation of Fourth Amendment rights. Fifth Amendment due process, which I'm sure you've heard lots about. Essentially, it's your day in court, right? Like we can go into a lot of detail about it, but really, when we talk about due process and what the Fifth Amendment intends, it gives you the opportunity to sort of defend yourself and really get more information about what is it that you're charging me with, and is it accurate, right? These people have been taken, removed from where they resided. They are not being allowed access to family, to their attorneys. And so they're not being allowed the opportunity to have their day in court before they are sent somewhere else. That is a complete violation of Fifth Amendment due process. And so then one of the others, which typically we're talking about in criminal court, but again here we're removing people, we're sending them somewhere else. So when you talk about that right to counsel and whether or not that is being afforded to these students that are subject to removal, or to these Venezuelan and El Salvadorian um, natives that are just deported, not going to court, not having any of that. Did they get the opportunity to talk to counsel before that happened? And so these are some of the laws and things that are at play. And so as we look at those different pieces, one of the ways, and I think Kate mentioned it briefly, one of the ways that it's being addressed is habeas corpus. And that's not something that I think typically in the immigration realm that that we would typically have to do, but because they are literally taking people off the street and detaining them without any evidence as to why, any lawful, I should say, any evidence that really supports a lawful a reason, um, we've been having to file habeas, and I say we as in immigration attorneys, right? Having to file habeas petitions to say, hey, this person is being unlawfully detained. They need to be released. And so that's something that's a new tool that has been not necessarily new, but it's a new area that hasn't always been in the forefront when it comes to immigration law, but it is definitely right up there front and center right now with these cases. So some of the cases I'm sure you've heard in the news, and I'll just kind of go over them briefly. These are not my cases, so I'm not going to do a deep dive, but I just want to show you how the things I just kind of laid out are at play in each of these instances. And if you've thankfully, most of these people have now been released. We're still hoping and waiting on one. But when we look at the case of Rumesa Ozturk, right? Like she lives in Massachusetts, way up high north, and they took her off the street. These were plain clothes ICE officers. They did not present a warrant. And what was the reason for it? She wrote an op-ed, right? So there's a free speech, right? She wrote this article, this paper at her school. She's a tough student. So she wrote this article, and the Trump administration has decided, oh no, that's anti-Semitic. That is against our policy. We have said we don't want this. They picked her up, right? But they do this with plainclothes ICE agents, don't identify themselves. They were wearing masks and they whisk her away. They don't she was not given the opportunity to speak with an attorney, so there's the right to counsel. She was not did not go to court. There was no preliminary hearing or any type of arraignment as a criminal type thing. There was nothing. It was just she was picked up, put in detention, and then very quickly thereafter sent to Louisiana. Again, far north United States, sent to Louisiana. There's not a shortage of space where she was. That was not the reasoning, right? It was just the laws, the rules are more amenable to the government in the Fifth Circuit, so they sent her there, right? So again, in that case, we've got First Amendment violation, we've got the Fourth Amendment search and seizure violation, we've got the due process violation, and again, the Sixth Amendment. She does have counsel, thankfully, and they were brilliant and expedient, and thankful she has been released. But again, this was after weeks in detention, that she had to stay there and endure that. And so that's her case. Very similar with Dr. Badar Khan Suri, right? Like this is a Georgetown professor, married to a US citizen. He had made some pro-Palestinian advocacy. Government doesn't like it. Similar thing, right? It's based on a free speech that is otherwise lawful, but the Secretary of State would have needed to personally determine that there was a compelling reason that it was compromising U.S. foreign policy interests, right? So they're using that anti-Semitism executive order as their basis for that. And so you've got the free speech violation. Again, he was taken, detained. Thankfully, he has now been released as well, was not given due process prior to that detention. And same thing, like initially did not have access to his counsel, but was eventually given that access. I see a couple of questions. I'm going to finish these two cases and then I'm going to answer one that I see there because it doesn't specifically speak to where I am. So the other two cases, Mohsen Madawi, I'm sorry. Again, Columbia student, taken, same four violations. It was based on his speech. He was also given pro-Palestinian speech, was taken, not given due process, just detained, eventually got access to his counsel, and the courts ruled that was unlawful. He was released. Now, here's the thing with all three of those that have been released, they're all still facing deportation, right? Like they were released and now can wait and try and address these things, but the deportation order has not gone away. And so they're still having to fight that. But thankfully, they can do that now at home with the support of their families and with the support of their counsel. The last one that's on the screen is Mahmoud Khalil, and he is the one that is still being detained. But again, similar to Mohsen, Columbia student, very active in, I think it was last year when he was doing some protests related to the atrocities in Gaza and pro-Palestinian, and government didn't like it, and so again disappeared him as they have done many, but he is still in detention. He does have attorneys. The ACLU has joined as on several of these other cases and doing a great job. I think Kate mentioned before, and what is so accurate and true is the immigration bar, the group of immigration attorneys, right, is such a collaborative group, and band together and really work as a unit, even when you have multiple agencies. You have the ACLU, you've got private attorneys, you've got all these different coming together on these individual cases and getting these things done. And so I think that's what we're seeing, how we're addressing it. And moving forward. And the good thing is the courts actually sort of did their jobs, and there was some pushback. It wasn't just, hey, the government gets to file these things and these people are still staying locked up. That's not how it's happening. The courts are actually holding the government to some of their things, and Waleed will talk more about that. But one of the questions that came up is, what exactly is the Alien Enemies Act and what does it allow for the government to do? And so the Alien Enemies Act, like I said, it's an old late 1700 law that was basically part of Alien Enemies and Sedition acts. And it is really the law that was at play that led to Japanese internment and that led to German and Hungarian internment here in the States before. It is widely available for abuses. It previously, and it was established to address war time. And that's really what it was. It says, like in times of war, the government can sort of suspend the president can sort of suspend some of these things. The piece with that, though, that I will say that's important is while it gives opportunities outside of wartime, and it has previously been used. I think Woodrow Wilson continued to use it well after the war was ended for several years. But that is sort of the process of what that law is used for, and it really, you're looking at wartime or an active invasion by a foreign government. And see, that's the other piece where I said, like, again, they're laying the groundwork, because it's not even just there's an invasion, it's an invasion by a foreign government. So you have, even if they're trying to argue that these Venezuelan, El Salvadorian immigrants are, they're saying gang members are an invasion, are they acting as a de facto government? If not, that's still not meeting the rule of the law. Likewise, if they try to apply this to pro-Palestinian protesters who were not all acting in consort, what foreign government are they acting on behalf of to say that it's an invasion? They're not all from the same place. They're not all linked in any way. So there are many holes to the government's utilization of that act, but that is what they are doing. And so they are trying to say that we are being invaded by immigrants that are gang members, and that whole piece, and that is the argument they're making. And that's why, again, we lay it out. The immigration attorneys are doing a great job of going ahead now, looking at what are the holes in their argument, and how are we going to combat that? How are we going to rebut their argument? So I think for now, I'm going to turn it back over to Kate. She's going to introduce Waleed to talk about sort of how these are being addressed and what's happening as a result, and then we'll come to additional questions at the end.
Thanks, Franchelle. So yeah, I would say that this is something where we're really kind of blown away with what the government has been doing. But if you're annoyed and think that this is all bad, I can tell you that at a lower level, it's been happening a lot where they move people around the country, take them away from their lawyers, just not for these same reasons. So I would encourage you to learn more about how our immigration system has always been a little bit biased against immigrants. And there's a lot of little nuances we can't share in this short of a time, but I'm going to turn some time over now to Waleed. He's going to talk to us about some of the situations that happened, mostly starting in early April, about many students that in the dead of night, ICE basically created chaos and disrupted their lives in a very cruel way. So he's going to give us some of the details on that, and then we'll be able to come back and answer some other questions and maybe clarify some points. So Waleed, take it away.
Thanks, Kay. I appreciate it. So if you guys can't hear me, just somebody let me know, but I'm going to just go ahead and get started. So what Franchelle was talking about was primarily involved some of the ideological attacks that we've seen on students. But that's not the only way that the government is attacking students. They were also attacking them on alleged criminal grounds or traffic violations. So they're coming at international students at multiple different ways. We know that there's the ideological way that they're coming at it, but they're also coming at it from this separate way. And that's what we've seen so far in the early months of the administration. What happened in late March and early April was a joint operation between the Department of State and the Department of Homeland Security to essentially terminate the international student status of thousands of students across the country. They called it the Student Criminal Alien Initiative. And basically what happened was the Department of Homeland Security, that controls everything that happens in the interior of the United States, was communicating with the Department of State that controls everything that happens outside of the United States, like embassies, consulates, and the issuance of visas abroad. The Department of Homeland Security took every single international student in the country, 1.3 million, and they ran them through the National Criminal Information Database called the NCIC. And then whoever came back with a hit, quote, quote, the Department of Homeland Security instructed the Department of State to terminate their visa. Okay. Now, the visa by itself does not necessarily confer any benefits or do any damage while the individual is in the United States. It just means the next time that they leave, they can't come back in on the same visa. They would have to go back to an embassy to get a visa from the consulate, which may sound easy, but if anyone in here practices immigration or has been around it, it's really not, especially if you have a negative mark on your immigration history. And so once those visas were revoked, the State Department would come back to the Department of Homeland Security and say, okay, the visas are revoked. Now it's up to you to do some damage to their student status in the country. Okay. Now, immigration regulations are pretty clear about how you're allowed to terminate a student's status. They can only be done in one of three different ways. None of them were at play here. So the Department of Homeland Security decided to terminate what's called the SEVIS record of about 6,000 students nationwide. Okay, SEVIS is the government database. It's Student Exchange Visitor Information System. It's the government database that houses all of the information about international student status while a student's in the United States. It basically tells you how many courses they're signed up for. Are they in a full-time course of study? Are they failing their classes and no longer maintaining their student status? Do they have a job on campus? Do they have a job off campus? Right? Did they transfer schools? Are they on summer break? It basically is the database that the universities have access to and the government has access to. It's kind of like your bank app, right? You still theoretically have money in the bank that you can access without the app. But if somebody shut down your app and closed it, it's like freezing your bank account. And that's essentially what happened when these SEVIS records were terminated for the students. So overnight, essentially, and these were happening. We learned about all of this, by the way, through litigation, which we're going to talk about in a second. We didn't know what was happening at first. 6,000 of these SEVIS records were all terminated in about 2 weeks, and it just created chaos all over the country for students, for immigration lawyers, for universities, for employers. When the SEVIS record is terminated, they can't attend school. This was right at the cusp of graduation season. It was late April. People had final exams. They had final projects. They couldn't attend classes anymore. The universities didn't know what to tell them. They're saying, yeah, I mean, you basically don't exist. And we can't get in trouble by, skirting our regulations and tell you to come to class. Employers had to terminate their student employees overnight or put them on unpaid leave. Immigration law firms like mine, we received hundreds of calls from students who didn't know what was going on. When the visas were revoked, they got most students got a very scary message from the Department of State saying, your visa has been revoked, that this has immediate effect on your status. You should leave the country immediately, or you'll be subject to detention, deportation, or fines. And then it had a little reminder in there that you don't have to be removed to your own country. You could be deported to a third country that's not your choosing. And then the email said, you should take care of your affairs now while you have time, because if we get you, I'm paraphrasing obviously, if we get you, you're not going to be able to close out all of your matters and everything. They were basically encouraging a mass self-deportation of students. And unfortunately, some students listened to that. They literally got on flights and they left like in the next couple of days. And unfortunately, while they still have legal rights, it's much harder to vindicate those legal rights, obviously, while they're outside of the United States. But yeah, it threw everyone into chaos. And some of the reasons cited for these SEVIS terminations, they were primarily over criminal grounds. We had a lot of traffic violations, speeding, running a stop sign. One of my plaintiffs in one of my cases, he got his SEVIS was revoked because he had one of those little frames around your license plate that you're apparently not allowed to have because it obstructs the license plate. And he got 2 tickets for that. And he had a 4.0 GPA, PhD student, overnight, couldn't take his exams. So it created really, really significant harm to these students. So as a result, the immigration bar really stepped up to the plate, and we filed dozens of lawsuits across the country. There were lawsuits with multiple plaintiffs in them. University clinics were bringing lawsuits for their students whose SEVIS records were terminated. There was one case in Atlanta that had 133 plaintiffs in it. That's because they had to stop. Then they amended later. They're thinking about amending to add hundreds more. So there's just this mass litigation that just ensued across the country with dozens of lawsuits being filed. The theory that we were bringing, we can't challenge the visa revocation, unfortunately. I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but there's a concept called the doctrine of consular non-reviewability that basically immunizes consular decisions from any judicial review. It's really breathtakingly broad, unfortunately for us. So we wanted to cure the immediate effects of what was going on with the students right now, and that's to restore their student status in the United States, and we can leave the visa issue till later. There's talk about class action and stuff about that. We'll get to that in a minute. So we challenged the terminations in court under 2 separate theories. The first is the APA section 706(2), 2, which prohibits agency action that's arbitrary, capricious, and unlawful. Basically, that means if an agency's decision has to be based on reason, it has to be a well-reasoned decision. It cannot be just arbitrary and with no link to any kind of law or purpose. And we also brought a due process theory that the records and the student status were terminated without giving the students an opportunity to even explain why they should not be terminated. Because I think the vast majority of these students, if they would just say, hey, I just got a speeding ticket and I paid it off, their SEVIS record wouldn't have been terminated. We also, simultaneously with the filing of those lawsuits, we moved for a temporary restraining order. This was the typical kind of paradigm that most of the lawyers brought, which was a complaint with an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order, which requires a showing of a likelihood of success on the merits, irreparable harm to the person asking for the TRO, balancing of the interests. And so, this type of behavior here was just, it's clearly unlawful. And the courts around the country recognize that almost off the bat. I mean, the government has had a really hard time. They've had a really hard time in these cases. They can't defend the actions. And so, thankfully, the judiciary has been standing firmly with us, at least on these SEVIS cases. And I think overall, I think the judiciary is doing a good job right now with all the nuanced things that are happening in immigration. And so, I mean, there are over 50 TROs that have been issued so far in these revocation cases. Now, as we move forward, and by the way, as we litigated these cases, we learned a lot. Some judges made ICE bring like one of the top guys on this on the stand and testify before them. That case was where we learned about all of this. At first, we didn't really know what was going on. We didn't know how many people were affected. It was chaos. Then once we got this guy on the stand and they were able to take his testimony, he just revealed this just, I don't even know the word to describe it. I mean, just this clearly unlawful, not grounded in any kind of policy operation that they have been conducting, this joint operation where they're just, terminating all of these records for no legal reason whatsoever. And basically we have that in writing, and we have that under sworn testimony in court, that basically that's what they did. And so now, after the government saw that, they started backtracking. They first started taking different positions in court. They were starting to say that, okay, you know what, like we're going to voluntarily restore the SEVIS record. They started changing their tune a little bit in court. Then they started submitting papers in court saying, we're going to reinstate everybody who was part of this initiative, the Student Criminal Alien Initiative, and that they were issuing a new policy. Then they came out with this new policy, right? Now, the new policy basically provides ICE kind of a legal framework to do this again. And so the fight is not over. People are now shifting into the policy, fighting that policy. The problem that we're running into right now is the government is starting to say, they're giving everybody everything they want in court. I mean, whatever you want in a settlement agreement, they're kind of agreeing to it right now. You want to see this reinstated? Okay. You want it reinstated all the way back to the date it was terminated? Okay. You want a letter from us saying that this has no legal effect? They're giving those letters. They want to make the case moot, and to basically not allow anyone to move forward to a judgment on the merits. So some people are taking those settlements across the country, and it's a case-by-case determination. If you think it's a good deal for your client doesn't want to fight, they can take that settlement. But they are maintaining, and I think they also are trying to moot all of these cases out so they can now push forward with that new policy and just kill any challenges that are out there to the new policy. Moving forward, I think that there was also a couple of class actions that were filed right around this same time that I think also pushed them to develop to change their tune a little bit and to develop the new policy. Now, as we move forward, I think everybody has kind of been winning these cases. All of our students have gotten the relief that they want. So we have to kind of consider what we want to do about settling, what we could do about the issue of mootness that could arise in future litigation. But we're also looking at how to get those visas back for all of those students, which is a really, really tough question because of the doctrine of consular non-reviewability. There are certain ways, and I think that this is an egregious enough action that we could finally pierce that a little bit. And then we're also looking at some claims for damages. I mean, if there are any, all the lawyers in here you can kind of just count the torts right off the top of your head. You have intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligent infliction of emotional stress. You have like tortious interference. People lost wages. People lost thousands of dollars that they're never going to get back. I mean, they had to be off of work for 3 weeks, 2 weeks, whatever it was. Some people lost their job completely. Their job didn't rehire them. There's real tangible damages here. And so I think that in the future, some creative civil litigation for damages is likely to occur. Overall, I think it was a really, really disgusting act that the government did, but I'm very, very impressed with how our bar responded and how we quickly mobilized. It's really created broad coalitions. As immigration lawyers, we don't go into federal court too much, but all of a sudden we found ourselves doing emergency motions for a temporary restraining order. A lot of these cases were proceeding pseudonymously. So we had to really dust off the law books and really look into those procedure books. And we answered the call, honestly. I mean, we really rocked them. I mean, almost every single case in the country won. So it was a very good notch forward for the immigration bar. So if there's any silver lining, I think it's that. And I think, Kate, if you want to hop back on to do your thing.
Certainly. I mean, this again was one of those areas where the government thought that they were going to be able to basically make the law whatever they said it. There are a lot of regulations, a lot of laws, a lot of statutes that deal with immigration. And immigration lawyers, we live there, right? Right, Wally? Right, Franchelle? Like, the government will never know the laws better than we do. And when they bring in these archaic laws that they have to dust off, or even in addition to what Frankie was saying about the Alien Enemies Act, the foreign policy grounds for inadmissibility, which is also what they were trying to do with those students that they disappeared. They're using things that don't apply. So we just love it when we can go in and fight and tell them, you don't know the law. And then we have these people who they bring in for their witnesses that just kind of fold like a house of cards. So it's kind of fascinating to watch as an immigration attorney. And we are very thankful that the judges are seeing the law as they are. One of the things that we just want to remind you all is, I'm going to steal a phrase from Frankie that I'm sure she stole from somebody else maybe. You've got to know your rights, and don't sleep on your rights. There are a lot of rights in immigration law, and those individuals that Wally talked about who left the country because they got that threatening email from the Department of State, they still had rights. And I'm sure Wally, it hurts his heart that he knows about some of those people, right, Wally?
Yeah, so, no, I mean it's very sad, but we're still hopeful. We're still
hopeful. Yeah. But it's so much easier when you're here. And if you think that you've been wronged, please do contact a lawyer. A lot of people think that lawyers are very cost prohibitive. A lot of these class action suits, they were done by groups of attorneys, and they made it very economical. So at the very least, please consult a lawyer if you think that anything is happening, and not just for immigration. There's pro bono lawyers, free consultations, low-cost consultations. Please do that. And we do try and we're building up our resource bank. There are lots of other resources out there, but I want you guys to know that even though this government thinks that the law is always on their side, lawyers know better, and thankfully the judges know better. So one of the questions that we got that I'm just going to throw out because it's for Frankie, and she kind of touched on this, but I want her to address it a little more, is on the Aliens Enemies Act. Could that be used to intern Muslims or people who are sympathetic to the Muslim cause and allies?
So, and I'll kind of respond, but you two feel free to jump in if you have anything to add. I would say in theory, right? In theory, yes, they could at least try. But again, in each of those times, like the instances that I mentioned, when you're thinking of either the Japanese internment or when they did it with the German and Hungarian, both of those were after war. So it was like World War I had ended, World War II had ended, and they did these things, and it was close in proximity. They continued it for
Mhm.
years after, but it was during that time. So here we're not at war. They're trying to liken it to a war, and they're
Mhm.
trying to the government is trying to make that argument, but we are not at war. And this is another beautiful thing that our president seems to not understand. He doesn't actually declare war, right? That responsibility lies with Congress. And so that's why he's trying to take the other piece and say, well, we're being invaded, because he can make that determination from a foreign policy standpoint. But to actually declare war and put us at war, that would have to come from Congress. That would require that extra time. So in theory, could it? They can certainly try, but it should not be. There would immediately be challenges to that if that came up, and I just can't foresee that in the current state that would be allowed to proceed. But I can't say that they wouldn't try.
Yeah. I've said this before about other things, but I feel like our government, even previous to Trump, they're kind of what, you hear the phrase sometimes, like shoot first, ask questions later. They're more so that than anybody. But if I can say any one thing is, please do not listen to what our current administration tells you the government functions and the Constitution are. They are so wrong. So please do not. Do your own research. They are trying to tear down every other branch of government to be their own, autocratic kings and queens. So not how it works.
One more thing I'll add on that before you move away, and I think I mentioned it earlier, and I believe when Waleed was talking, he kind of demonstrated that as well. This administration, and Kate just said too, more so than any other, they are very much a let's throw it out there and then refine. Like we're gonna shoot the moon first and do the most egregious we know it's not going to fly, and then we're going to let the courts essentially back us up enough to then we can stay within the constitutional bounds is what I see them doing. That's what they did previously. That's what they've done with the SEVIS terminations and then having to sort of back off, regroup, come with a new policy, right? Like that is their MO. They do something that they know is illegal, and then they wait for the challenges to kind of put them in a position that they have a chance to keep moving forward. So just keep that in
Yeah.
mind as well.
And so I know we've had some questions coming. I actually wrote down some questions too that I wanted to kind of maybe give you guys a little bit more of an insight into some immigration minds over here. So I was just thinking, about the section where Waleed was talking, that there was like a very basic problem with the way that the government did their terminations, right? Not just that it was in the dead of night, but who did it, right? Like, can you just like maybe do a little snippet on who normally terminates SEVIS and who did it this time?
Yeah, so normally, SEVIS was terminated by designated school officials at school. These are people who work in the universities that can terminate the record for basic reasons. Like, let's say you transfer schools, right, and you don't need the or the SEVIS needs to be updated to show that you transferred. Or let's say you married a U.S. citizen, you got a green card. You don't need a SEVIS anymore. You don't need your student status, so you can terminate the SEVIS. The government has very few ways where they can terminate the SEVIS. None of them apply to what happened here. There's only one criminal way that the government can terminate student status, and that's to be convicted of a crime of violence that the individual who's convicted did 1 year or more of punishment. None of that was at play for the traffic tickets. None of it was even at play for even the more, somewhat more serious crimes like shoplifting, theft, some violent DUI. None of it was at play. And so basically they I don't know if they did it intentionally or not, but basically they just did something that nobody knew like how to react to, because it was so unheard of, it had never happened before, that we were all just like, what's this? I mean, I didn't know what a SEVIS was before. Like, I didn't know extremely what it was to this level of detail. But we were all just like, what is this? Like, and at the beginning, remember, no one really knew what happened. Nobody knew what happened. and until we went to court, we got some people on the stand and we got really good information.
And one of my favorite ones was from my alma mater, Waleed. What was he terminated for?
Yes, that guy. He caught too much fish. He caught too many fish.
Yeah. He had a fishing license violation.
Fishing
Shame,
license
shame,
violation.
shame, shame. Good fish in Utah, though. So I can see why he was catching a lot of fish.
He's a good fisherman.
He was from Japan, so, he probably loved fish. So, I think we just have one more minute, and I was going to go back over to Frankie on one. So I know we've talked about this before, but the basis for Secretary Rubio and the law that he cited, which is in the Immigration and Nationality Act and also in a statute, is the foreign policy ground of inadmissibility, which too long of an explanation of just we don't want you in the country or you can't come into the country is a basic explanation of what that term of art means. But when has it been used before? Can you think of any instances that actually applied and what this would be very not analogous to?
Yeah, so like there was a case previously where there was a diplomat in the country and there was question as to whether or not he was a spy and feeding information back to his initial country. And so in that instance, they applied it and they said, yes, he needs to be deported. We're going to remove him. Again, not what's at play here. We're not talking about, these are just students, right? These are people who are here to learn and they are otherwise behaving lawfully, right? Like otherwise lawful behaviors. In no way are they diplomats or foreign dignitaries. That's not what we're dealing with here, and that is the type of instance where those were previously applied, which is completely distinguishable from what they have been doing here recently.
Because the foreign policy they were saying is our ability to fight anti-Semitism globally.
Exactly.
Which is not really a foreign policy
at all.
One of the ones that I was going to kind of touch on is that Waleed mentioned is that they are one of you guys mentioned they are deporting people and they are getting agreements to deport people to third countries, right? Rwanda, Libya, Venezuelans to El Salvador. There are actually mechanisms, and that's why they're losing in some of these other cases. Like it was unfortunate that Kilmer Abrego Garcia got deported to his own country, but he was deported and also put in jail.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what happened.
It's not just jail.
Deportation, right?
Prison. It's one of the worst prisons.
Yeah, well, he moved to a nicer jail. He got to a nicer jail after we complained.
Right.
But these are places like Libya has been in a civil war for 14 years, and we're trying to make deals with these countries. And there are actually ways that you are supposed to be told where they're going to send you and be able to say, I also have a fear of that. And so that is also going through the courts. The Supreme Court is waiting on that. The administration thinks that it doesn't say what it does say. Anyways.
Which is why Kilmer Abrego Garcia's was so egregious because, like you said, they're supposed to be able to weigh in on it. And in his case, they sent him to the one place that the court had already said, don't send him to. Like that was.
Yeah. Withholding of removal means we will not remove you to the country you fear persecution. It's exactly what happened. I know we just have a few minutes left. This was a CLE for those of you who needed CLE credit. So we do have a CLE code for you. Those of you who maybe are listening and can't see it, I'll read it out to you. It's 174280601, and that is our State Bar of Texas course. I do believe that there is an ability to apply for reciprocity. If you have another state and you're wondering if we already had reciprocity, please, I guess, get in touch with us maybe through our info@mlfa.org, and we'll let you know that. And otherwise, I mean, we have just really enjoyed watching the government kind of spin their wheels on some of these, but it's very frustrating. And I want you guys to know it's very frustrating for us on this side to watch how it's creating the chaos. And Waleed said he didn't know if it was intentional. I know this government, their intent is chaos. So when you see it, just know that attorneys see it too. Please reach out. We do have a rights card on our website. It's a pop-up. So if you want to have just a quick access to a know your rights, and it's not going to give you everything, but it's literally things like the Fifth Amendment says you do not have to speak. You do not have to say a thing if you are approached by law enforcement. Certain places will make you identify yourself, but that's a state by state. But please don't sleep on your rights. Read up. Don't listen to the government's narrative. Do your own research. If you went to school here in the United States, what you learned in your 8th grade civics class is far more right than what our Secretary of Homeland Security is telling Congress about what these rights are. So
get an attorney.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
if possible, get an attorney. If nothing else, just a consultation before you proceed.
So thank you so much for joining us this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. And we look forward to sharing more time. Thank you so much to Waleed. He's actually my work son because he is an alum here and he was my child here. And then to Frankie and to those of us who helped in the tech and to set all this up. So we appreciate all you've done to help make this happen.
See you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Workmom.
Thank you.
Talk to you later.